It's March. The brackets are officially out, and since March Madness is starting this week, I thought it'd be a good time to learn about the biggest, loudest, and maybe most complicated empire in college sports, Kentucky men's basketball. We're talking about a program that has spent over a century oscillating between being the gold standard for the sport and being a cautionary tale for the NCAA. And whether you bleed blue or you live to see them lose, you have to respect the history. It's basically a 120-year-long soap opera. And if you want to understand why Kentucky fans like myself treat a basketball game like a matter of life or death, you do have to look at where it started, as a student fundraiser with zero budget and zero expectations. It's January 1903, a physical education professor named W.W.H. Mustaine calls a group of students together. He doesn't have a jersey for them yet. He doesn't have a court for them yet. He has a hat, and he passes it around, collects exactly $3, hands them a single basketball, and tells them to start practicing. That's it. That's the start. That is the birth of the most winning program in the history of the sport. $3 and a good luck. 2 weeks later, on February 6, 1903, they play their first game. Now, back then, they were actually called State College. They played Georgetown College and got handled, 15-6. They finished that first year 1-2, with their only win coming against the Lexington YMCA. And for the next 7 years, there was no official coach. The team was run by student managers like Leander Andrus. They practiced and played in Barker Hall, which was a campus gym with no seating facilities. If you wanted to watch, for some reason, you stood on the floor or leaned against the wall. It was a student club that the university administration barely acknowledged. Truth be told, basketball was the little brother to football. In fact, most of the players were just football players looking for something to do in the colder months. But then things got weirdly good. In 1912, under coach E.R. Sweetland, they went 9-0, undefeated. They claimed a Southern Intercollegiate title. Then in 1921, they produced their first superstar, Basil Hayden. He was known as the Blonde Apollo. He was the team captain and Kentucky's first ever All-American. He led them to a Southern Tournament title, and his jersey still hangs in the rafters today. Kentucky was building a regional identity, but they were still pretty small time. They were still playing YMCA teams and regional colleges. They were waiting for a catalyst, and in 1930, they found him. Kentucky hired a high school coach from Illinois named Adolph Rupp. He was a student of Fog Allen at Kansas, and he arrived in Lexington with a massive chip on his shoulder and a revolutionary idea: the fast break. Yes, that had to be invented. He was the Baron of the Bluegrass. By 1948, he had the Fabulous Five. They won the NCAA title, then went to London and won Olympic gold for the USA. Kentucky was clearly not just a college team anymore. They were a national brand. So they built Memorial Coliseum for nearly $4 million, which was a white elephant that skeptics said they could never really fill. They were wrong. The fans filled every single one of those 11,500 seats every single night they played. In 1951, Kentucky wins its third national title. But behind the scenes, a district attorney in New York named Frank Hogan was uncovering a massive web of point shaving. This was the first great crisis of college basketball. Hogan's investigation eventually revealed that, unfortunately, players from 7 schools were involved, but Kentucky was the crown jewel of the scandal. It turns out that Alex Rosa, Ralph Beard, and Dale Barnstable, 3 of the legendary stars who had built the Rupp dynasty, had been taking bribes from gamblers. We're talking about $500 to $1,000 per game to ensure that Kentucky did not cover the point spread. The most high-profile fix was a 1949 NIT game against Loyola of Chicago. Kentucky was the heavy favorite, but they played a strangely sluggish game and lost 67-56. When the news broke, Rupp was obviously in complete denial. He famously told the press that gamblers couldn't touch his boys with a 10-foot pole. He was forced to watch those words become his greatest embarrassment. Groza and Beard were arrested at LaGuardia Airport in New York. They eventually confessed to taking the money. They were banned from the NBA for life. And by the way, these were Olympic gold medalists and national champions, and suddenly they were pariahs. And the NCAA didn't just punish the players, obviously, they came for the program. The investigation found that Rupp had used ineligible players and provided improper benefits. The result was the first ever death penalty. The 1952 to 1953 season was simply deleted. No games were played, no schedule existed. The program was effectively dead for 12 months. Kentucky spent that year in a dark room, fuming. And so they came back in 1953 to 1954 with a vengeance and went 25-0. Absolute perfection. But the NCAA wasn't done with them yet. Because their stars had technically graduated, or exhausted eligibility at least, during the suspension year, the NCAA ruled them ineligible for the tournament. Well, Rupp's response was, if we can't play with our guys, we aren't going to play at all. They declined the tournament invitation. They stayed home with a perfect record of 25-0 just to prove they were still the best. Then comes 1966, which is the hinge of history. Reps Runts. An all-white team met Texas Western in the championship. Texas Western started 5 black players. Kentucky lost 72-65. It was the sign that the old segregated world that Rupp occupied was over, and the program had to integrate. In 1969, Tom Paine became the first black player to sign with UK. Rep's era finally ended in 1972, and his longtime assistant Joby Hall took over. Joby spent a decade in Rep's shadow, constantly being compared to the legend until 1978. That year, he won the title and finally proved that Kentucky could win in a modern, integrated era without the Baron of the Bluegrass. Of course, the peace didn't last. Fast forward to 1985, Eddie Sutton arrives from Arkansas. He's winning games, but the culture in Lexington was getting reckless again. The tension culminated in 1988 when an Emory air freight envelope popped open during shipping. Inside was $1,000 in cash sent to the father of recruit Chris Mills. The NCAA swarmed the campus. They found academic fraud, specifically involving a recruit named Eric Manuel, who had a suspicious ACT score. By 1989, the program was a smoking crater. Sutton resigned. The NCAA hit them with a postseason ban and a television ban and massive scholarship cuts. So Kentucky was back in the wilderness. Then Rick Pitino arrives in 1989 like a lightning bolt. He takes the unforgettables, Richie Farmer, Sean Woods, Darren Fieldhouse, and John Pelfrey. These were the 4 Kentucky kids who stayed when everyone else fled because of the sanctions. They led us to the greatest game ever played, 1992 versus Duke in the Elite Eight. This shot. Christian Laettner. Kentucky loses in the most heartbreaking way possible, but that loss made the world fall in love with the program again. It led directly to the 1996 Untouchables, which was a team so deep they had 9 future NBA players. And then Tubby Smith takes over in 1997 and wins it all in his first year with the Comeback Cats. The mid-2000s were a strange period of decline, and of course we have to talk about Billy G years. From 2007 to 2009, Billy Gillespie was a ghost in Lexington. He was the wrong fit from day one. There are stories of him hiding from reporters in bathroom stalls to avoid questions, literally being chased around New Circle Road. The team missed the NCAA tournament for the first time in decades. It was really the only time in the modern era where Kentucky felt truly irrelevant on the national stage. Well, John Calipari arrived in 2009 to fix that. He leaned into the one-and-done model and turned Lexington into an NBA pipeline. He produced 47 draft picks and won the 2012 title with Anthony Davis, and for a decade, Kentucky was the center of the basketball universe again. But by 2024, the cycle repeated. We were tired of the early exits. We wanted banners, not just draft picks. And Calipari exits for Arkansas, which really is its own dedicated video because that story is just insane. And then Mark Pope, a captain on that legendary 1996 team, comes home. And you know what? Time will tell how we as a fan base will embrace that Pope hire. From a $3 ball in a tiny gym with no seats to the biggest stage in the world, Kentucky basketball is a cycle of winning, burning down, and rising from the ashes. Happy March Madness, and go Cats.